What you are about to hear is a nightmare that defies description. We are talking about a 14-year-old child who was brutally slain, violated, and subjected to unthinkable mutilation. A true monster had invaded our community. On March 24th, detectives stepped into the shadows of a derelict property in East Toledo, chasing a tip regarding a vanished child. The structure had stood empty for years, a hollow shell scarred by flames from a mysterious blaze that history had forgotten. That morning, however, as law enforcement swept through the gloom, the radio crackled within minutes, calling for heavy backup. They found something that demanded the presence of the medical examiner. The whispers reached the onlookers on the street well before any official statement was made. In the upper level of that decaying home lay the remains of a young girl, sparking terrified murmurs that this might be the 13-year-old who had vanished nearly a week prior. For days, her loved ones had been begging the public for any scrap of news. Teachers had flagged her empty desk, and the community had plastered the neighborhood with flyers. Meanwhile, the man who claimed to have seen her last, her own father, had quietly slipped out of the city. Just days before, he had stood in front of news cameras, playing the role of a distraught dad. By the moment the grim discovery was made, however, authorities were already hunting him down. The aftermath brought a torrent of simple yet haunting questions. What clues led detectives from a missing persons report to a ruin in the city? And why did the initial stories fail to line up? Most chilling of all, how did the man pleading for help on screen transform into the target of a massive police pursuit? This is the harrowing story of Kaymani Latig, a tragedy that is still unraveling. It remains an active investigation, leaving us to wonder what horrors transpired in the final days before she was located. Before we dive into the darkness, if you find this coverage compelling, please hit that like button and share your thoughts below. It truly supports the channel. Drop a comment telling me where you are tuning in from, and make sure to subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you. This content is intended strictly for educational and documentary purposes. We do not condone or glorify any violence or criminal behavior discussed here. Please be advised the following content contains disturbing details. Long before search parties combed the avenues of Toledo or statewide alerts flashed across screens, Kaymani was just a 13-year-old girl navigating a complex world. Born on March 28, 2011, in Ohio, she was the daughter of Darnell and Tiara. Her parents were already estranged by the time she took her first breath. Her guardianship was never simple, a tangled web that was difficult to follow. From the start, her existence was split among adults who cared for her but struggled to provide a permanent foundation. As an infant, she was taken in by her mother's godmother, a guardian who stepped up before Kaymani even turned one. This woman became a pillar in her life, raising and supporting her, continuing that care for years. But as time passed, circumstances shifted. Around 2019 or 2020, she moved in with her grandmother, Dorothy. Settling in Toledo, Dorothy assumed the role of primary caregiver, even though the official custody papers were not finalized until 2024. By then, Dorothy had already been doing the heavy lifting for years. Life under Dorothy's roof wasn't a fairy tale, but it was a sanctuary Kaymani could call her own, sharing the space with 2 dogs. She learned independence early, mastering the routine of a home where adults worked long hours. With Dorothy's schedule being so demanding, Kaymani became a classic latchkey kid. She carried her own keys and phone, adhering to a strict schedule she almost never deviated from. After the final bell, she would head directly home, check in, and remain indoors unless granted explicit permission to leave. Even at 13, she possessed a maturity and sense of duty that earned the trust of the adults around her. At Spring Elementary, where she attended 7th grade, the faculty witnessed a version of her that truly shined. Described as an honor roll student with a tireless work ethic, she was just weeks away from being honored with a kindness award. Every morning began with a hug for her teacher. She shared her meals freely and tutored classmates struggling with their work. She offered this help with a grace that ensured no one ever felt ashamed. Those who knew her didn't use empty platitudes. They described a soul that was warm, considerate, and genuinely pure. She had an old soul, favoring the classic tunes her grandmother played. She also had a passion for gaming, especially Ms. Vacant, which she played with fierce, competitive joy. On the field, she enjoyed basketball and football. Whenever guests arrived, Kaymani would gravitate toward the little ones, keeping them laughing and entertained. Her 14th birthday was approaching fast, and she had told Dorothy she wanted a basketball-themed celebration. She was planning the colors and decorations, fully expecting to be there to blow out the candles. While she was busy dreaming of birthday balloons, team jerseys, and frosting, a dark storm was brewing on the horizon that she never anticipated. It all started on Saturday, March 15th, when Kaymani spent the day hanging out with her mother, Tiara Caston. The visit kicked off when Darnell Jones dropped her right at Tiara's doorstep. Tiara would later explain that Dorothy, the grandmother acting as Kaymani's guardian, had greenlit the drop-off, insisting the arrangement was standard procedure. Despite the tangled web of their family dynamics, they fought to carve out pockets of normalcy and simple joy. That specific date burned into Tiara's memory because it marked one of those scarce occasions she had her daughter solely to herself. Music. She recalled a serene afternoon, echoing with laughter and the beeps of video games, soaking up the intimacy she had been craving. Following that visit, Kaymani returned to Dorothy's place, and Sunday, March 16th, began with the usual rhythm. However, darkness brought a shift. Late that evening, Kaymani dialed her father, and Darnell later recounted to the press that terror laced her voice. He claimed she believed an intruder was attempting to force their way inside, and she was desperate not to be left by herself. That is the sort of plea that stops a parent's heart cold. Acting on it, he stated he grabbed his cousin, jumped in the vehicle, and sped toward Dorothy's Toledo neighborhood to investigate. Darnell stuck to his script whenever the cameras rolled, insisting he and his cousin remained with Kaymani until roughly 12:30 in the morning. They allegedly left believing she was settled enough to manage the night, noting she was accustomed to solitude during Dorothy's long work shifts. This was the narrative he fed to the press, law enforcement, and anybody questioning his whereabouts. Yet, digital footprints surfaced later, revealing contradictions that shattered his carefully constructed timeline. Music. Kaymani's device logged a call to Darnell at 1:29 a.m., a call he claimed went unanswered, followed by a frantic series of dials to his girlfriend. The timestamps implied she was still desperately reaching out long after he supposedly calmed her fears and departed. When Monday dawn broke, the girl known for her punctuality and strict routine had vanished without a trace. Returning home that Monday morning, Dorothy Latig anticipated the same silent, orderly atmosphere she had known for years. After her early shift, the residence should have been secured just as she left it, with Kaymani prepping for class or already gone. But the second she hit the porch, a chill of dread washed over her. The entry stood unlatched, slightly ajar, a jarring sight given that Kaymani was meticulous about security and never left it open. Shoving the door wide, she instantly realized the breach went far beyond a simple unlocked lock. The interior was a chaotic mess. Stripped of its usual comfort and familiarity, Dorothy navigated the living area, mind racing to process the scene, her eyes locking first on the gas stove, hissing with no flame. The atmosphere screamed of a frantic exit, or perhaps an intruder interrupted mid-act. Venturing deeper into the family room, she froze. Music. Kaymani's spectacles lay abandoned by the sofa, a terrifying sign since she was practically blind without them, and ominously close by lay her undergarments. The horror intensified as she spotted Kaymani's sleepwear discarded carelessly on the dining room floor. Even her house keys remained, and that was the precise second Dorothy's concern curdled into pure terror. Because Kaymani Music would never step foot outside without those keys. She screamed her name, checking every chamber, but the home held a silence music that felt heavy and wrong. Snatching her mobile, she dialed Kaymani, but it rang a single time, music, before dumping straight to voicemail. She redialed with the same result, leaving her no choice but to take the only step a guardian could. She dialed 911. But before the sirens even approached, Music, the residents, Dorothy, contacted the school. The admin checked the logs and confirmed Kaymani was absent, a massive red flag for a student with a perfect attendance record. Once law enforcement landed, Dorothy lodged the report, cementing the nightmare into reality. Kaymani Latig was officially a missing child. Her details blasted to patrol cars, neighboring districts, and eventually the statewide systems. By the following day, Dorothy faced the TV cameras, struggling to articulate the house of horrors she had discovered. She felt that if the public grasped the grim details of that morning, they would inevitably realize a tragedy had already taken place. Long before the missing persons file was opened, Kaymani Latig had attempted to signal the adults that her world was off-kilter, with school being one of her few safe havens to voice it. She had confided in instructors that she felt unsafe in her own dwelling, a statement not easily dismissed, particularly from a kid who rarely grumbled. Instructor Karen Harabedian picked up on signals far louder than speech. She observed Kaymani's body language as the final bell approached, witnessing the sheer dread pooling in her eyes when it was time to pack her bag. Karen recognized the signs and refused to write them off as music, simple playground accidents, because the injuries clashed with Kaymani's cautious nature and how she behaved at school. Since Ohio teachers are legally mandated reporters, Karen contacted Lucas County Children's Services (LCCS) multiple times, and she wasn't the sole voice raising concerns. Other staff members rang the alarm as well, including a bus driver who had witnessed enough to be genuinely disturbed. These weren't vague feelings. They were detailed reports regarding a terrified child who displayed clear symptoms of trauma and potential abuse. The red flags kept piling up. During one assessment, Dorothy confessed to using physical punishment, an admission that should have changed everything. However, when investigators interviewed Kaymani in private, she claimed she felt completely safe living with Dorothy. Music. It is tragically common for victims to downplay their reality, terrified of the consequences if they dare to speak the full truth. Faced with conflicting narratives, the caseworkers simply filed the paperwork and moved on. Yet, beyond the official inquiries, the warning signs persisted. Music. A classmate recalled seeing marks on Kaymani's arms, hearing her whisper about violent rows with her grandmother. To another kid, it might have sounded like a spat, but the adults knew it was something far more sinister. The fear and repeated cries about feeling unsafe should have sparked an immediate rescue. Music. But the bureaucracy dragged its feet, and the danger continued to mount. LCCS later verified they received at least 3 distinct reports regarding Kaymani, one in December 2023 and 2 more in March 2024. Music. Upon reviewing the file, they determined there wasn't sufficient evidence to extract her from that environment. They merely offered Dorothy advice on proper discipline and closed the investigation. That is precisely why, when word broke that Kaymani had vanished, her teachers felt a sickening sense of déjà vu. Music. They weren't shocked that a tragedy had occurred. They were just horrified that it had been allowed to go this far. On March 21st, the community rallied, with volunteers from across the region arriving with flyers and flashlights. Fueled by the desperate energy that only a missing child case ignites, they scoured parks, back alleys, vacant lots, and wooded trails. Music. They flagged down cars to show drivers the face of a 13-year-old girl, praying for a spark of recognition. Music. Total strangers joined the hunt as if she were their own blood, knowing that children don't just evaporate without a trace. As search teams combed the city, Tiara Caston, Kaymani's mother, was crumbling under a nightmare no parent should ever have to endure. She gripped the flyer with trembling hands, pleading with anyone who would listen to look at her daughter. Music. She kept repeating that she just needed one single person to spot the photo and realize they had seen the child. Is greater than I haven't eaten in 3 days. We need every bit of support we can get from Snorts. Anyone. We don't care who it is. Please, just come out and help us find my niece. By the next day, Sunday, March 23rd, a felony abduction charge was filed against Darnell Jones. Jones is Kaymani's father, and official records pinpoint him as the last person to see her before she disappeared. Is greater than this man has been in my home countless times. He usually takes her for the weekend to visit him and his other children. I feel so betrayed. You acted like her dad for so long, right to my face, like you actually cared about her well-being. But where is she? If my baby doesn't come home, I will never recover. And it kills me to say that because I have laughter. Other kids. Is greater than from the start. Police refused to treat this as a runaway situation music because the evidence at the scene told a different story. The ransacked house, the unlocked door, the left-behind glasses and keys, it all pointed to one conclusion. Kaymani was responsible and stuck to her routine. She never broke protocol like this. Detectives immediately suspected abduction. And the music. Investigation went into overdrive within hours. While officers canvassed the area for witnesses, one disturbing fact kept rising to the top. Darnell Jones was the last confirmed person to have eyes on her. Investigators locked onto that detail instantly, and music, as they grilled him in formal interrogations. They noticed his story began to fracture depending on how they phrased the questions. He stuck to the broad strokes, but the minutiae, the timing, the order of events, the phone calls didn't always match up. Detectives cross-referenced his statements, music with call logs, Dorothy's version of events, and the physical clues in the home. With every comparison, the holes in his alibi grew wider. But long before police started picking apart Darnell Jones's timeline music against phone records, his name was already flagged in court systems across Ohio. Music, his criminal record dated back to his late teens, revealing a behavioral pattern that was impossible to ignore once they pulled the files. He had been booked for intoxication and disorderly conduct. His rap sheet started when he was barely a teenager. Those early offenses dragged him into court repeatedly, where magistrates gave him stern warnings to straighten up his life. Yet, he drifted through those years with zero stability or direction. That chaotic rhythm followed him right into his adult life, leaving a paper trail of incidents that sketched a portrait of pure dysfunction. Music. One major red flag popped up early on an arson charge where he was accused of deliberately setting a structure ablaze. Rather than face a jury, he entered a special plea to attempted arson, maintaining he didn't do it while admitting the prosecution had enough dirt to lock him up. The judge ordered him to get counseling, hold down music, steady work, and finish his GED. For a hot minute, it looked like he was actually behaving, but that obedience was short-lived. By 2015, Darnell was tangled up in even darker aggression. Police logs say he unleashed rounds at a guy over at the Greenbelt complex, then vanished into thin air before the squad cars could pull up. Music. When the law finally caught him, he was put on community supervision. But he broke those rules time and time again. Every slip-up brought more eyes on him, more time added to his sentence, and sterner lectures. But nothing stuck. The chaos just kept looping around, over and over without end. Then came the time he bludgeoned a man with a heavy car alternator during a fight. The injuries were brutal enough to need a hospital run, landing Darnell a felonious assault case. Music, a heavy charge that promised real time. Even with a deal on the table, he got probation with strict rules, but he ignored them, racking up public intoxication raps alongside his violent offenses. A toxic mix of liquor, raja, and rash choices plagued his record, with every new report underlining the same dangerous instability. His past was stained with domestic trouble too, specifically a 2019 clash with his wife, Antonia. The reports detailed a fight where music, he got physical, and witnesses later told cops they heard things smashing and saw him hurl a television set off a balcony in a rage. He eventually took a guilty plea for the domestic abuse. But even with that stain on his record, the cycle didn't stop. Every incident amplified fears about his explosive anger, particularly when alcohol was in the mix. On top of that, he had multiple run-ins tied music to firearms, despite being a convicted felon who wasn't allowed anywhere near a weapon. Things got so gritty that he even took a slug to the chest during a trespassing beef. Instead of steering clear of trouble, cops later found him passed out in a daycare lot, clutching a pistol. That bust sent him behind bars for a solid year. When he got out, he was under watch again. But the red flags about his temper and gun access never really went away. Year after year, the story remained terrifyingly the same. The files described a guy battling addiction, lashing out violently when provoked, music, and constantly arming himself, even though the law said he couldn't touch a weapon. As detectives combed through those files while hunting for Kaymani, they were shocked to find that this dark background had never come up in her welfare discussions. While the citywide hunt for Kaymani ramped up, Darnell had been laying low at a small spot on Willard Street, crashing there with his girlfriend Nina Turner and their kid. Nina had been picking up on subtle shifts in his mood way before the cops eyed him, and those odd vibes stuck with her, nagging at her gut. Right after the event, he demanded she kill the security cameras at her place. But she refused. She also caught how he wouldn't look her in the eye when she pressed him on what was happening. Something else gave her the creeps. A relative mentioned seeing Darnell stash something under the basement stairs. One afternoon, while Darnell was out, Nina went down there and cracked open the storage crawlspace. Inside, she discovered soil-crusted boots and a rolled-up rubber car mat, the type you use to shield the trunk when the seats are down. Music. She knew right then that something was horribly wrong. He hadn't been working, and those boots hadn't touched his feet in ages. Not recently. Music not for months, so the fresh dirt on them was suspicious. As was the sneaky way he tried to conceal them, she made the tough call to ring up the investigators sweeping the area and told them to get over there. When they showed up, she gave them the boots and the mat without blinking. Later, when Darnell came back and saw his stash was gone, he didn't fight her music or ask why. He just walked out the door and vanished. Is greater than here is the suspicious part before they even arrived at the door. He was already begging me to kill the security feeds. My house is fully wired with cameras. He insisted I shut them all down. I looked at him, confused, and asked, why on earth would you need the cameras off? Is greater than. His excuse was that he hadn't dragged himself through the front door until 5 o'clock that morning. Is greater than he was terrified they would track his timeline because of that late arrival. He needed the footage gone. Is greater than. In my head, alarms were ringing. I thought, if your hands are clean, why are we hiding evidence? I told him I'd handle it, but I left every lens recording. He assumed I'd done his dirty work. Is greater than she shares a 2-year-old daughter with Jones. She says she was right there in the room when he attempted to bury the incriminating items inside her own home. Is greater than once. The detectives finished grilling us downtown and cut us loose. I made it back to the house before he did. My family pulled me aside and whispered that he had stashed something deep in the basement, right under the staircase. I didn't hesitate. I called the investigators immediately. They executed a search warrant and seized the stash. The moment he realized his secret cache was empty, he vanished. That was the last time I laid eyes on him. Is greater than police tore through the property. What exactly did he try to conceal beneath your stairs? Is greater than. It was a heavy-duty cargo liner, for the back of an SUV. The kind of rubber mat you lay down when you flatten the seats to haul heavy loads or to protect the upholstery from getting stained. That is what he had rolled up and shoved into the dark corners of my basement. That, and his work boots, which were absolutely caked in thick mud. I never actually saw him plant them there, but I made it clear I wasn't going to be a warehouse for his guilt. He must have believed I would protect him. He was wrong. Is greater than Jones fled, booking it all the way to Columbus, his old stomping grounds, right after the raid. He just evaporated. We abandoned the house immediately. I was petrified he might circle back and take it out on her or any of us. That silence from him was more terrifying than any threat he could have screamed. So, she threw essentials into bags, scooped up her daughter, and retreated to a secure location. She had no way of predicting his next move once the reality set in that she was the one who handed him over to the law. A few days after settling into the safe house, her phone rang. It was him, calling from a Columbus number. She didn't keep it to herself. She fed that intel straight to the police, knowing full well that silence was no longer a survival strategy. However, on March 24th, the narrative shifted. A dilapidated structure on Chase Street, a blight that should have been leveled ages ago, suddenly became ground zero for the investigation. Residents of East Toledo had been raising hell about that place for nearly 2 years. It always felt like a magnet for bad energy. Back in May 2022, flames had gutted the second floor, and the fire marshal never did pinpoint the spark that started it. The city slapped a hazard sticker on it, declaring it a public danger destined for the wrecking ball. Yet there it stood. As dawn broke, the street swarmed with badges. Neighbors crept out, drawn by the flicker of red and blue lights and the yellow tape sealing off the porch. As the hours dragged on and the detectives remained inside, the crowd grew, inching closer, desperate for answers but dreading the truth. Tiara was out there in the cold, trembling. No one would give her a straight answer. Is greater than I need to know if that is my baby. They aren't telling me a thing. It takes nothing. It takes a second to snap a photo. It takes nothing to just tell me when the coroner brings her out so I can see with my own eyes if that is my child. You all are standing there silent. You can tell the difference between a grown woman and a child. My daughter is tall, but she is built like a little girl. You know the difference. What are they whispering about over there? Is greater than. They won't speak to me. Not a single word has been said. Is greater than now. They are saying it might be days before I can identify her. No, absolutely not. Is greater than deep inside that ruin. Investigators had discovered the remains of a teenage girl, but they held back the announcement, waiting for the official word from the medical examiner. Yet, the whispers began to circulate on the street long before the official statement. The crowd read the grim faces of the officers entering and exiting the doorway. With every passing minute, the horrific reality became impossible to ignore. Then, the confirmation finally dropped. The coroner identified the victim as 13-year-old Kaymani Latig. The ruling was homicide, the result of injuries too brutal for any child to endure. When the news hit her, Tiara's legs gave out. She crumbled to the pavement, surrounded by strangers, holding her up as she screamed for the daughter she had spent days praying to find alive. Police had to form a human barricade around her as the crowd pushed in. For a heartbreaking moment, Chase Street was nothing but tears, prayers, and a community struggling to comprehend the sheer evil that had snatched a young life away. By evening, the mayor stood before the cameras, calling it one of the darkest days Toledo had ever witnessed. The department head confessed that even with 30 years of service under his belt, the sheer brutality of the discovery left him completely shaken. Once the identity of Kaymani's remains was confirmed, a wave of sorrow swept through Toledo, transforming into rage almost instantly. Within moments of the headlines breaking, a throng of people had already congregated on Dorothy Latig's front lawn. Quiet murmurs of frustration rapidly escalated into full-blown shouting matches, fueled by hearsay, traveling significantly faster than the actual truth. One faction was convinced she failed to shield her granddaughter, while others suspected she was hiding dark secrets. And these theories quickly evolved into menacing warnings. Dorothy hadn't even reached her driveway when desperate calls from neighbors urged her to stay away, warning that a hostile group was lying in wait with violent intentions. She later recounted hearing terrifying vows to detonate explosives at her residence and promises that the crowd would take matters into their own hands the moment she appeared. Is greater than. Let me start with this. Yesterday was chaotic. We need to understand what went down at your residence. We are trying to get the specific details regarding your property. Social media was buzzing with claims that you were taken into custody, but law enforcement confirmed that was not true. Could you set the record straight on exactly how things unfolded at your house yesterday? Is greater than well. I received a phone call alerting me to an enraged crowd gathering outside my door. They were furious. It was essentially the same group from earlier, waiting to see if Kaymani was inside the property, Neighbors reached out to warn me that people were openly discussing the violence they intended to inflict on me upon my arrival. The detective arranged for a squad to meet me, help retrieve my belongings, and safely remove me from the premises. I actually requested the handcuffs myself, purely as a strategy to appease the crowd and get them away from my home. Are you afraid is greater than is greater than? To be clear, no, I was never under arrest. They transported me to the station, but I was not in legal custody. Is greater than do. You feel your life is in danger at this moment. Is greater than absolutely. Is greater than. Could you share the nature of the messages you have been getting? Is greater than. They threatened to level my house with explosives. They vowed to physically hurt me. It has just been an endless stream of menacing declarations coming from every direction. The severity of those intimidations was enough to compel law enforcement to intervene immediately. The following evening, the community united for a massive candlelight tribute to Kaymani. Educators, parents, music, friends, neighbors, and total strangers stood shoulder to shoulder under the night sky music as the tragic news permeated the city. They clutched candles, whispered prayers, and stood in solemn silence before images of the little girl who beamed with joy in every school portrait. Yet, while the community grieved publicly and cried out for justice, the man who maintained he was solely trying to safeguard his daughter had already vanished. He was a fugitive. When Toledo broadcast the statewide alert for Darnell Jones, the urgency was palpable. Investigators were certain he had already skipped town. His identity, aliases, known vehicle, and mugshots were blasted to police stations throughout Ohio. The critical break music came from Nena Turner, risking her well-being again to inform detectives that his burner phone pinged back to Columbus. Consequently, the manhunt pivoted 2 hours music south, with officers staking out locations linked to that specific device. The situation escalated when his car was identified, and tactical teams converged on the location before he had any opportunity music to slip through their fingers again. They located him outdoors, noting immediately that he had attempted to alter his look music by shaving his head down to the skin, rather than displaying fear or shock. He appeared unnervingly tranquil, a demeanor that clashed violently with the storm swirling around the investigation. The squad maintained a tactical perimeter, knowing a single misstep could be catastrophic. When commanded to raise his hands, he responded by repeatedly taunting them to end his life, behaving like a man who had already accepted a fatal outcome. Even then, he refused to remove one hand from his pocket, forcing officers to scream their orders again as they observed his muscles tighten music, just enough to signal an imminent strike. Suddenly, he produced a firearm. The confrontation concluded in a heartbeat, gunfire erupted, and although the impact dropped him to the ground, he continued to vocalize his desire for death. Is greater than state your name. Is greater than just end. It is greater than sir. Let me see your hands immediately. Is greater than remove your hand from your... I swear to God. Pull your... Shots fired. Shots fired. Is greater than. Do not move is greater than. Stay down is greater than okay. Target is down. Do not move. He has a 33 right there. Is greater than 33 in his grip. E maggiore di no. Wait, that is a radio, but there are 33 round magazines right here. Freeze. Don't make a move or we engage. Hold it right there. Is greater than target identified. That is the suspect. Is greater than. We need immediate dispatch. Requesting medical support at this location. I am on it. Is greater than down. Face down on the pavement. Is greater than restraints applied. We are secure. Appreciate the assist. Medical is en route. Is greater than. Just let me end it. Man. Is greater than negative. Not happening. We are keeping you here. Is greater than I can't do this. Is greater than I am done with all of it. Is greater than. We need patrol units for perimeter. Is greater than secure the scene. Get on the horn. Status check. Who discharged is greater than from the vehicle. Is greater than suspect fired. You return negative. Suspect engaged first. Copy. You intact is greater than yeah. I am solid. You is greater than understood. Okay, eyes on me. Focus. I need to roll you over. We need to get you into recovery position. Stay with me, moving to your side now. Is greater than I have control. Okay? Is greater than where is the injury located? È maggiore di can't tell. Lower extremities. Looks like the leg. Multiple entry wounds here. Is greater than copy that. One round to the arm as well. Oh man, you need emergency aid immediately. The suspect was rushed under heavy guard to Wexner Medical Center in Columbus, where teams fought to stabilize him for the operating room. As surgeons operated, the legal noose tightened. Already hunted for kidnapping, investigators now connected him to the grim slaying of his 13-year-old child. The violent standoff with law enforcement only added to the mounting list of felonies. Following the tragic loss of Kaymani, the public outrage shifted beyond just the man in handcuffs. The glare of scrutiny fell upon Lucas County Children's Services. The community viewed the agency not as a bystander, but as a silent accomplice that had serious explaining to do. Those who had watched the horror of Kaymani's case unfold since she first vanished demanded to know how a mountain of red flags could pile up while those in charge sat on their hands. Officials admitted they had fielded multiple alarms regarding the girl over the prior months, citing reports of harsh discipline and threats to her mental well-being. Shockingly, not a single one of those desperate cries resulted in her rescue or placement into protective custody, although caseworkers claimed they interviewed her privately and deemed the environment safe. Locals insisted the Bureau was blind to a pattern of abuse that was glaringly obvious to the teachers who saw her nearly every single day. Whistleblowers from within the organization revealed a terrifying reality of a system on the brink of total collapse. They described the nightmare of Monday morning's 17 or 18 new files stacked up before they could even power on their screens. Entire departments designed for 5 agents were running a skeleton crew of just 2. The psychological weight was crushing and the shifts endless. Burnout was so rampant that fresh recruits barely lasted a season before the stress broke them. Each departure left the remaining staff drowning in work, creating dangerous gaps where vulnerable children slipped through the cracks unnoticed. Experts began to argue that the agency's own rigid hiring protocols were fueling the disaster. Audrey Haroon, a youth home manager, criticized the strict mandate requiring a bachelor's degree in social work, noting it disqualified individuals who had actually survived the foster system themselves, people who could spot the subtle warning signs of danger far faster than any textbook could teach. She argued that the most capable protectors were being rejected at the door due to academic hurdles that had little to do with real-world survival instincts. The public fury reached a boiling point, forcing county commissioners to demand an external investigation. They announced the formation of a citizen task force. Within 24 hours, more than 30 volunteers stepped forward. By the submission deadline, over 200 names were on the list. Candidates had to satisfy at least one specific requirement: personal survival within the system, professional background in child protection, experience in law enforcement, credentials as a mandatory reporter, or a standing as a trusted community leader. The atmosphere in Toledo transformed from mournful silence to a loud demand for systemic overhaul. Kaymani's name became a rallying cry, symbolizing not just a tragic loss, but the glaring institutional rot that had to be excised. Through the pain, the community held on to the hope that if the system evolved, it was because they refused to let her become just another closed case file. Once Darnell Jones was medically cleared and processed at Wexner, the wheels of justice began to spin rapidly. A grand jury handed down a staggering indictment covering 15 separate counts, revealing the horrific scope of the crimes. The indictment read like a laundry list of horrors: abduction, a litany of offenses, music, destruction of evidence, attacks on law enforcement, and the most damning charge of all, aggravated capital murder. The allegations were so heinous that prosecutors made a grim announcement this would be the first death penalty case Ohio had seen music in over 10 years. Naturally, the spotlight turned blindingly bright. Documents hinted he had already confessed to playing a part in the tragedy, yet, when he faced the magistrate, he entered a plea of not guilty. Until the gavel falls on a verdict, the system still affords him the presumption of innocence. Two public defenders stepped up to navigate what promised to be a labyrinthine and exhausting legal battle. The initial war was waged over bail. At first, the price on his freedom was set at $4 million, a staggering figure meant to mirror the gravity of his alleged crimes. But the state wasn't satisfied. They demanded the option be taken off the table completely, ensuring there was zero possibility for him to walk free. Defense lawyers begged for a recess to calculate a reasonable figure, but Judge Golding wasn't having it. He aligned with the prosecution. Darnell was ordered held without bail, locking him behind bars until his day in court arrived. In those first hearings, he appeared in that infamous, a thick green garment, known on the street as a turtle suit. Music. It is the heavy, tear-resistant smock forced upon prisoners who music are flagged as high risks for self-harm. Jail psychiatrists mandated the precaution music, likely spooked by his erratic conduct during the standoff in Columbus. It was a clear sign the system viewed him as a ticking time bomb, who needed eyes on him 24/7, not just for the crimes he stood accused of, but because his mind seemed to be unraveling. While he sat in a cell, detectives were busy building a mountain of proof to ensure he stayed there. They raided his cousin's residence, confiscating electronics and tracking data, hunting for clues to piece together the exact sequence of events. Subpoenaed call logs told a different story than the one Darnell's mother had spun, regarding her last contact with him, raising the chilling possibility that she knew far more than she let on. Dorothy swore she and the girl lived in isolation, yet police found a digital trail leading straight to Lisa White, the woman who often crashed at the house and babysat, despite her insistence that she was nowhere near the scene the night the child vanished. New revelations were breaking daily, meaning the probe was expanding rapidly, even as the legal machinery began to turn, leaving lawyers scrambling to keep up. Each fresh clue suggested the truth of Kaymani's last hours was far darker and more twisted than the public dared to imagine. Once forensics cleared the derelict property on Chase Street, authorities wasted no time in wiping the site of the nightmare from the map. Though it was already slated to be torn down, the city fast-tracked the bulldozers. The neighborhood simply couldn't stomach looking at that house of horrors any longer. Before the heavy machinery moved in, locals rallied to rescue the tributes left for the little girl. Music. They salvaged every flicker of light, every plush bear, and every handwritten prayer. For nearly 2 hours, they carefully relocated the shrine to a sanctuary down the block. When they were done, music, the relocated tribute was even grander than before. But then, a final twist: flames engulfed the cursed house before the wrecking ball could swing. The cause wasn't instant, but authorities strongly suspected someone had torched it on purpose. At the new shrine, grief turned to rage as residents used spray paint music to voice the ugly truths officials ignored. Graffiti screamed demands for justice. She mattered. You silenced her. Answer for your sins. While the city mourned, a bitter feud erupted over the child's final farewell. Tiara and Dorothy locked horns over control of the funeral. The animosity festered until a judge had to step in to mediate the sorrow-fueled power struggle. The court ultimately handed the reins to Dorothy Music for the simple reason that she had been the child's primary guardian for over 5 years. Community funds were shuffled between mortuaries as the plans changed hands. Yet, the donations kept pouring in. People were desperate to offer any shred of help in a situation that felt so helpless. Kaymani's tragedy refused to disappear into the news cycle ether. As 2025 drew to a close, the case music remained wide open. Her father, Darnell Jones, was staring down 15 felony counts, with the specter of execution still looming over the proceedings. His defense is gearing up to play the insanity card, a strategy that could completely reshape the trial set for 2026. For the moment, he sits in a cage, denied release, while the wheels of justice grind slowly through endless hearings and psychological reviews. The gavel hasn't fallen yet, but one fact is undeniable: the haunting legacy of Kaymani Latig remains. Whisper your theories in the section below. Remember to follow along as we unearth more chilling secrets from the archives.